The high-tech facial recognition scanners didn't trigger. The elite sentries at the gates didn't move. They just stared in stunned silence as a small, 7-year-old girl walked through the heavy iron gates of the Sungwon estate. No shoes, a dress stained with the dust of a long journey, and a muddy backpack clutched to her chest. In this fortress of the Korean underworld, no outsider ever breathed the air without permission, least of all a child. Lee Sungwon stepped out onto the marble balcony, his irritation cutting through the room like a blade. "Who allowed this breach?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. But the girl didn't flinch. She didn't even look at the guards. Instead, she raised a small, trembling hand and pointed a finger directly at the massive, gold-framed portrait in the center of the hall. Her voice was small, but it shattered the silence of the mansion. "Sir, why is my mama's photo in your house?" The dragon's composure vanished instantly. Sungwon's jaw tightened, and the glass of expensive whiskey in his hand tilted, unnoticed. Every guard in the room turned toward the painting. The image of Crystal, the woman Sungwon had spent a lifetime trying to erase from his records, but could never remove from his heart. The woman who had vanished into the shadows years ago to protect a secret he was only now seeing in the flesh. As the girl clutched her backpack tighter, her watery eyes met his. Sungwon's heart thundered against his ribs, not because of the breach, but because of a terrifying realization. The girl had his eyes. "Stay with me until the end, because the secret Lee Sungwon is about to uncover will dismantle an empire and turn this entire story upside down." Before we dive into the shocking truth, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. Now let's begin. The crystal tumbler in Sungwon's hand tilted precariously, a single amber drop of whiskey falling like a heavy tear onto the polished marble floor. For 20 years, he had been the architect of silence, a man who moved pieces across the city's chessboard without ever raising his voice. But this silence was different. It wasn't the silence of respect or fear. It was the deafening ring of a secret being ripped wide open. The guards stood like statues, their eyes darting from the small, mud-streaked girl to the towering portrait of Crystal. To them, the woman in the green dress was a ghost, a forbidden image that the boss stared at when he thought the house was empty. To Ruby, she was simply Mama. Sungwon set the glass on the balcony railing with a hand that, for the first time in his career, possessed a microscopic tremor. He descended the grand staircase, each footfall echoing through the atrium. Up close, the child looked even smaller, a tiny island of pink fabric in a sea of cold stone. Her natural puff bun was slightly lopsided, tangled with tiny bits of leaves, and the dirt on her dress suggested she hadn't just walked past the gates. She had crawled through the underbrush of the estate's perimeter to find him. "Look at me," Sungwon commanded, his voice raspy. Ruby lifted her chin. The defiance in her gaze was a physical blow. She didn't look at his gold chain or the dark ink of the tattoo snaking up his neck. She looked straight into his soul with eyes that were dark, deep, and hauntingly familiar. They were the same eyes that looked back at him from the mirror every morning, yet they were softened by Crystal's warmth. "I asked you a question," Ruby whispered, her voice cracking but refusing to break. "My mama has this same picture in a tiny frame by her bed. She told me the man who had the big one was the only person in the world who could help if she ever went away. Are you that man?" A collective intake of breath hissed through the room. The guards shifted, their hands hovering near their holsters, waiting for a signal to remove the intruder. Sungwon didn't give it. He stepped into the light of the chandelier, the glow catching the sharp angles of his jaw. "Crystal." He breathed the name so softly it was almost lost to the air. "She told you to come here?" Ruby nodded, reaching back to pull the strap of her worn backpack tighter against her shoulder. "She said if the men with the snake tattoos ever came back to the flower shop, I had to run to the hill with the white walls. I ran for 3 days." The mention of the snake tattoos turned the air in the room to ice. The Black Snake Syndicate, the very animal Sungwon had spent a decade trying to keep away from Crystal's door. He realized then that the shocking truth wasn't just that he had a daughter. It was that his silence hadn't protected Crystal at all. It had only left her alone to face the monsters he had created. Sungwon knelt, his expensive suit trousers hitting the floor as he leveled his gaze with the girl. He reached out, his fingers hovering inches from her cheek, hesitating to touch something so pure. Ruby didn't flinch. She leaned into the space he offered, a silent demand for the protection she had been promised. "You're safe now, Ruby," he said, the words feeling heavy and strange on his tongue. The silence in this house is over. The air in the atrium seemed to thin, the heavy scent of expensive cologne and old wood giving way to the metallic tang of rain and road salt clinging to the child. Sungwon stayed on one knee, his shadow stretching long across the marble. He could feel the eyes of his men on his back, predators watching their alpha show a flicker of humanity. "The backpack, Ruby," he said, his voice regaining its practiced steel, though his eyes remained fixed on her face. "Let me see what you carried across those hills." With trembling fingers, Ruby slid the straps from her shoulders. The bag hit the floor with a dull thud, the canvas stiff with dried mud. Sungwon unzipped the main compartment, expecting to find toys or clothes. Instead, he found a folded map of the city, a half-eaten granola bar, and a small, velvet-lined jewelry box that had seen better days. He pulled the box out, the weight of it familiar in a way that made his pulse skip. When he clicked the latch open, a soft shimmer of green jade caught the light of the chandelier. Inside lay half of a heart-shaped locket, fractured down the middle with surgical precision. The gold filigree was shaped like a dragon's wing, intricate and sharp. Sungwon's hand went instinctively to the hidden pocket inside his suit jacket, right over his heart. He pulled out a small silk pouch and emptied its contents into his palm. There it was, the other half, the second wing. 8 years ago, on a rainy night in a Seoul tea house, he had snapped that locket in two. He had given Crystal the left side, telling her it was a compass that would always lead her back to him if the world became too dark. He had kept the right side as a penance, a reminder of the life he had forced her to leave behind to keep her breathing. He pressed the two pieces together. They didn't just fit. They locked with a magnetic click that echoed through the silent hall. The dragon's wings were whole again. The jade heart was complete. "She kept it?" he whispered, the realization hitting him harder than any physical strike. All this time, she kept it. Ruby watched him, her breathing hitching as she saw the two halves unite. "She said it was the key to my father's heart," she said, her voice small but certain. "She told me that if the two pieces ever touched again, I wouldn't have to be afraid anymore." Sungwon looked at the locket, then at the girl. The resemblance wasn't just in the eyes or the stubborn set of her jaw. It was in the way she stood her ground in a house full of wolves. She was his blood, his legacy, and his greatest vulnerability. The shocking truth settled into his bones with a cold finality. He was no longer just a boss. He was a father. And the woman who had spent 7 years protecting this secret was now in the hands of men who would use that love to destroy him. He stood up, the joined locket gripped tightly in his fist. He turned to Tony, his most trusted lieutenant, whose face was a mask of grim understanding. "The Black Snakes think they found a weakness," Sungwon said, his voice dropping an octave into a register that made the guards straighten instantly. "They think they can use my daughter to break me. They are about to learn that they haven't given me a weakness. They've given me a reason." The cold weight of the reassembled locket in Sungwon's palm acted as a tether, dragging his mind back 8 years to a summer that had felt like a fever dream. Before he was the dragon of Seoul, he had been a man suffocating under the expectations of a bloodline he hadn't chosen. Then came Crystal. She had been a burst of color in a city of gray suits and rigid hierarchies. A traveling photographer with a laugh that could cut through the thickest tension. She had captured him not with a camera, but with a gaze that saw past his title. They had met in a small, rain-slicked alleyway in Itaewon, where she was trying to photograph the neon lights reflecting in a puddle. He had held an umbrella over her, and for the first time in his life, Lee Sungwon hadn't wanted to be anywhere else. That summer was a montage of stolen moments. Late-night street food under the glow of paper lanterns, whispered promises in high-rise apartments, and the intoxicating feeling of being known. Crystal didn't care about the territory he controlled or the men who bowed when he walked by. To her, he was just Sungwon, a man who liked his coffee too dark and his poetry too sad. But a mafia heir's heart is never his own to give. The shocking truth of their romance had traveled back to his father, a man who viewed love as a terminal illness. The elder Lee hadn't used bullets to end the affair. He had used a folder. He had sat Sungwon down in this very mansion and showed him photos of Crystal leaving her apartment, unaware of the red laser dots dancing on her back. A dragon does not nest with a songbird. His father had hissed, his voice like dry parchment. You have two choices. She leaves tonight, or she never leaves at all. The memory of that final night burned hotter than any bullet wound. Sungwon had met Crystal by the Han River, the jade locket clutched in his hand. He hadn't told her the truth, that his father's men were already positioned in the shadows, waiting for his signal. He had lied. He had told her she was a distraction, a summer whim that had grown stale. He had snapped the locket in two, the crack of the gold sounding like a bone breaking, and handed her the left side. Take this and run, he had whispered, his eyes cold to hide the scream in his throat. If I ever see you again, I won't be the one holding the umbrella. I'll be the one holding the gun. He had watched her retreat, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, thinking he had saved her. He had spent the next 8 years believing that by breaking her heart,